My darling philosophers, welcome to our daily devotional reading. A special welcome to the members of our make-believe monastery. I hope you are well. And I hope you are real. If not, then at least I am. Let's close our eyes, turn inward to that magnificent being which is human consciousness. I know normally we feel our consciousness from the head, but I'm really feeling it from my heart area and even a little bit lower today. It's pretty cool, so part of me just wants to sit with it. Because words do distract us. Because again, immediately, as soon as I speak, I'm back at this area. And I just want to stay here. I suspect that as soon as I start reading, my consciousness will jump back to my mind, to my head, to my eyes that see, and my mouth that speaks. But let's see if maybe something of this intense awareness of my torso moves with me into the reading. Socrates. Come then and let us see what we really mean about rhetoric, for I do not know what my own meaning is as yet. When the assembly meets to elect a physician or a shipwright or any other craftsman, will the rhetorician be taken into counsel? Surely not, for at every election he ought to be chosen who is most skilled. And again, when walls have to be built or harbours or docks to be constructed, not the rhetorician but the master workman will advise. Or when generals have to be chosen and in order for battle arranged or a position taken, then the military will advise and not the rhetoricians. What do you say, Gorgias? Since you profess to be a rhetorician and maker of rhetoricians, I cannot do better than learn the nature of your art from you. And here let me assure you that I have your interest in view as well as my own. For likely enough, some of or other of the young men present might desire to become your pupil. And in fact I see some, and a good many too, who have this wish. But they would be too modest to question you. And therefore when you are interrogated by me, I would have you imagine that you are interrogated by them. What is the use of coming to you, Gorgias? They will say. About what will you teach us to advise the state? About the just and the unjust only, or about those other things also, which Socrates has just mentioned? How will you answer them? Gorgeous. I like your way of leading us on, Socrates, and I will endeavor to reveal to you the whole nature of rhetoric. You must have heard, I think, that the docks and the walls of the Athenians and the plan of their harbour were devised in accordance with the counsels partly of Themistocles and partly of Pericles, and not at the suggestion of the builders. Socrates, such is the tradition, Gorgias, about Themistocles, and I myself heard the speech of Pericles when he advised us about the middle wall. And you will observe, Socrates, that when a decision has to be given in such matters, the rhetoricians are the advisers. They are the men who win their point. Socrates. I had that in my admiring mind, Gorgias, when I asked what is the nature of rhetoric, which always appears to me when I look at the matter in this way to be a marvel of greatness. Blessed is he who has both the marvel of rhetoric and knowledge. Gorgeous. A marvel indeed, Socrates, if you only knew how rhetoric comprehends and holds under her sway all the inferior arts. Let me offer you a striking example of this. On several occasions I have been with my brother Herodicus or some other physician to see one of his patients, who would not allow a physician to give him medicine, or apply the knife or hot iron to him. And I have persuaded him to do for me what he would not do for the physician, just by the use of rhetoric. And I say that if a rhetorician and a physician were to go to any city, and had there to argue in the ecclesia, or any other assembly, as to which of them would be elected state physician, the physician would have no chance. But he who could speak would be chosen if he wished. And in a contest with a man of any other profession, the rhetorician more than anyone who would have the power of getting himself chosen, for he can speak more persuasively to the multitude than any of them, and on any subject. Such is the nature and power of the art of rhetoric. And yet, Socrates, rhetoric should be used like any other competitive art, not against everybody. The rhetorician ought not to abuse his strength any more than the pugilist or pancratiast. A pancratiast is that one who boxes and wrestles. Pugilist is probably then one or the other. or other master of fence, because he has powers which are more than a match either for friend or enemy. He ought not therefore to strike, stab, or slay his friends. Suppose a man to have been trained in the palestra and to be a skilled boxer. He, in the fullness of his strength, goes and strikes his father or mother, or one of his familiars or friends. But that is no reason why the trainers or fencing masters should be held in detestation or banished from the city. Surely not. For they taught their art for a good purpose, to be used against enemies and evildoers, in self-defense, not in aggression. And others have perverted their instructions, and turned to a bad use their own strength and skill. But not on this account are the teachers bad. Neither is the art in fault, or bad in itself. I should rather say that those who make a bad use of the art are to blame. And the same argument holds good of rhetoric. For the rhetorician can speak against all men and upon any subject. In short, he can persuade the multitude better than any other man of anything which he pleases. But he should not therefore seek to defraud the physician or any other artist of his reputation merely because he has the power. He ought to use rhetoric fairly, as he would also use his athletic powers. And if after having become a rhetorician he makes a bad use of his strength and skill, his instructors surely ought not on that account to be held in detestation or banished. For he was intended by his teacher to make a good use of his instructions. But he abuses them, and therefore he is the person who ought to be held in detestation, banished and put to death, and not his instructor. Socrates. You, Gorgias, like myself, have had great experience of disputations, and you must have observed, I think, that they do not always terminate in mutual edification, or in the definition by either party of the subjects which they are discussing, but disagreements are apt to arise. Somebody says that another has not spoken truly or clearly, and then they get into a passion and begin to quarrel, both parties conceiving that their opponents are arguing from personal feeling only and jealousy of themselves, not from any interest in the question at issue. And sometimes they will go on abusing one another until the company at last are quite vexed at themselves for ever listening to such fellows. Why do I say this? Why, because I cannot help feeling that you are now saying what is not quite consistent or accordant with what you were saying at first about rhetoric. And I am afraid to point this out to you, lest you should think that I have some animosity against you, and that I speak not for the sake of discovering the truth, but from jealousy of you. Now, if you are one of my sort, I should like to cross-examine you. But if not, I will let you alone. And what is my sort, you will ask? I am one of those who are very willing to be refuted if I say anything which is not true, and very willing to refute anyone else who says what is not true, and quite as ready to be refuted as to refute. For I hold that this is the greater gain of the two, just as the gain is greater of being cured of a very great evil than of curing another. For I imagine that there is no evil which a man can endure so great as an erroneous opinion about the matters of which we are speaking. And if you claim to be one of my sort, let us have the discussion out. But if you would rather have done no matter, let us make an end of it. How on earth do you say no to something like that? And keep faith. Gorgeous. I should say, Socrates, that I'm quite the man whom you indicate, but perhaps we ought to consider perhaps we ought to consider the audience. For before you came, I had already given a long exhibition, and if we proceed, the argument may run into a great length. And therefore I think that we should consider whether we may not be detaining some part of the company when they are wanting to do something else. Sapphiron. You hear the audience cheering Gorgias and Socrates, which shows their desire to listen to you, and for myself, heaven forbid that I should have any business on hand which would take me away from a discussion so interesting and so aptly maintained. Callicles, by the gods, Sapphiron, although I have been present at many discussions, I doubt whether I was ever so much delighted before, and therefore if you go on discoursing all day, I shall be the better pleased. Socrates. I may truly say, Callicles, that I am willing, if Gorgias is. Gorgeous. After all this, Socrates, I should be disgraced if I refused, especially as I have promised to answer all comers, in accordance with the wishes of the company. Then do you begin, and ask me any question which you like. Let me tell you then, Gorgias, what surprises me in your words, though I dare say that you may be right, and I may have misunderstood your meaning. You say that you can make any man who will learn of you a rhetorician. Yes. Do you mean that you will teach him to gain the ears of the multitude on any subject, and this not by instruction, but by persuasion? Quite so. You were saying, in fact, that the rhetorician will have greater powers of persuasion than the physician, even in a matter of health. Yes, with the multitude, that is. You mean to say with the ignorant? For with those who know he cannot be supposed to have greater powers of persuasion. Very true. But if he is to have more power of persuasion than the physician, he will have greater power than he who knows. Certainly. Although he is not a physician, is he? No. And he who is not a physician must obviously be ignorant of what the physician knows. Clearly. Then, when the rhetorician is more persuasive than the physician, the ignorant is more persuasive than the ignorant. Then, when the rhetorician is more persuasive than the physician, the ignorant is more persuasive with the ignorant than he who has knowledge. Is not that the inference? Gorgeous. In the case Supposed, yes. And the same holds of the relation of rhetoric to all the other arts. The rhetorician need not know the truth about things. He has only to discover some way of persuading the ignorant that he has more knowledge than those who know. Gorgeous. Yes, Socrates. And is not this a great gorgeous. Yes, Socrates. And is not this a great comfort? Not to have learned the other arts, but the art of rhetoric only, and yet to be in no way inferior to the professors of them. Socrates. Whether the rhetorician is or is not inferior on this account is a question which we will hereafter examine if the inquiry is likely to be of any service to us. But I would rather begin by asking whether he is or is not as ignorant of the just and unjust, base and honorable, good and evil, as he is of medicine and the other arts. I mean to say, does he really know anything of what is good and evil, base and honorable, just or unjust in them? I'm just going to start at the beginning. I stopped in the middle of the paragraph and now I can't find my way. Socrates. Whether the rhetorician is or not inferior on this account, is a question which we all blah 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 blah. Sorry. I get impatient with myself sometimes. Socrates. Whether the rhetorician is or not inferior on this account is a question which we will hereafter examine if the inquiry is likely to be of any service to us. But I would rather begin by asking whether he is or is not as ignorant of the just and unjust, base and honorable, good and evil, as he is of medicine and the other arts. I mean to say, does he really know anything of what is good and evil, base and honorable, just or unjust in them? Or has he only a way with the ignorant of persuading them that he not knowing is to be esteemed to know more about these things than someone else who knows? Or must the pupil know these things? It's because I'm writing things that's not necessarily related to the text. Or must the pupil know these things and come to you knowing them before he can acquire the art of rhetoric? If he is ignorant, you who are the teacher of rhetoric will not teach him. Is that not your business? But you will make him seem to the multitude to know them when he does not know them, and seem to be a good man when he is not. Or will you be unable to teach him rhetoric at all, unless he knows the truth of these things first? What is to be said about all this? By heavens, Gorgeous, I wish that you would reveal to me the power of rhetoric, as you were saying that you would. Gorgeous. Well, Socrates, I suppose that if the pupil does chance not to know them, he will have to learn of these things as well. Socrates, say no more. For there you are right, and so he whom you make a rhetorician must either know the nature of the just and unjust already, or he must be taught by you. Certainly. Well, and is not he who has learned carpeting a carpenter? Yes. And he who has learned music a musician? Yes. And he who has learned medicine is a physician in like manner. He who has learned anything whatever is that which is knowledge. This knowledge makes him. Certainly. And in the same way, he who has learned what is just. To be sure. And he who is just may be supposed to do what is just. Yes. Thus far our reading. He will go on to say then, I just want to connect it because it connects to the previous thing. Because Gorgias uses the, if I remember correctly, I haven't read it again recently. And Gorgias makes the claim that the trainer of the boxer can't be held accountable if he goes and boxes his parents. But now Socrates is claiming that he will make them just, and so the just would not do such a thing, something like that. The just would not use his skill unlawfully or unjustly. The power of words and the power of being able to use words well, I think, is what this dialogue is about. And maybe the entire confrontation with the sophists. Because suppose you do succeed in making someone an exceptional speaker, and he turns out to be evil. Well, we've seen what that leads to. So I was writing about the greatest danger, I wrote, is the ignorant. If ignorance is our greatest sin, and indeed we do live in a world where death and struggle is a reality, and hence the knowledge of good and evil a necessity. But if we do not cultivate that, what use is it to us? The greatest danger are the ignorant, because the masses of ignorant are persuaded by the one ignorant fool who pretends to know what he does not know. And so easily. There's nothing easier than to persuade a human heart. what I was distracted about when I distracted myself from the reading is I wrote down, because we live in this world, we need this knowledge, the knowledge of good and evil. And then I wrote down, but what if you don't hold the view that there's objective morality? How do we play with that in this good and evil, this quest for good and evil? And then I got a sort of an answer. What is that answers you have that is like tentative? There's a better word for it, but I'm obviously not. Well, I could be, I can be a good speaker if I prepare, and if that's my intention, but it's not. What is honorable in such a view, I would say, is that you do not claim to know. So what you're not encouraging people to follow your rules, but to search for themselves, to question themselves. It seems there's no objective morality, no objective truth, which I still need to look into a little bit more. Is basically a call to phronesis. Is it phronesis? Yeah, practical wisdom. Constantly questioning. Interpreting the context. And what is required. It's quite a challenge, but a noble one. Like I said yesterday, I think my experiment is proving to be a little bit more difficult than I thought, because I forget what I say. I'll come back to that. I see now why Plato has this problem with the sophist, if in fact the sophist taught merely rhetoric, persuasion, how to persuade the crowd by skillful speech without knowledge, without actually virtue. It's really, really dangerous for someone who knows nothing to hold sway over the people. Especially, as I've said, as if the people themselves also know nothing and don't know that they know nothing. But I want to also add a positive note to that. The power, and then I wrote the safety, in having a rhetorician at hand. As Gorgeous said, he went with his brother and the physician, and he was able to persuade people of what his brother was not able to do. As someone who has the knowledge but not the skill, that might be your greatest asset. Someone who has the skill of the gift of the gap. to have a defender by your side. What a gift. What an extraordinary gift. On that note, let me speak of my experiment. I don't think I'm going to run any further ahead. I'm like one day ahead because I'm someone who works with deadlines, and I work very well in the job I currently have because there's always deadlines. And so if I don't have to do something, I often don't. So I'm only one day ahead, which is still interesting. And I today lost the desire. I don't know how to say it. I am also in a very sober frame of mind today. I go between, I think I've said it from the beginning, so it's not like I'm saying anything new unless you haven't been following me long. I go from one to the other, being complete woohoo to being an absolute skeptic. And I'm more on the skeptical side today, though not completely. The two are beginning to merge in me. And so well, let me, so apparently I've got two premises thus far. There's human intention behind the coincidences. Premise 1. Premise 2, there is divine intention behind the coincidences. Then, of course, there's, well, that, I don't know if it's premise 3 or a potential conclusion, but these two, if I just take these two, then they contradict each other. And we cannot have two contradicting premises, or we can, but then anything follows, right? Anything can follow from two contradicting premises. And so it feels like, because I don't foresee that I could be convinced of the non-truth of either of these. I can't see what would disprove either of these premises, these claims. And so it's not a very good experiment. Unless both are seeking for proof of the divine. Which is why I will keep recording and having one day ahead and not put it online. I still haven't posted what will have to go out tonight until after he has posted, in case it is just the bots picking it up. Because that's one of the conclusions to be drawn from this vast majority of conclusions to be drawn, seeing that the two premises contradict themselves, contradict each other, that it's all just bots. It's all the internet. But I don't think the internet is dead, even if it is all bots. So there's that. So I won't be running ahead any further than I am. And until September, then I will probably, after my holiday, after my tattoo, come back in real time. That being said, can the universe really be infinite? And what is the big problem with the creation story? Depends on your definition of infinite, I suppose. If time disappears at a certain point, isn't that infinite? Don't you then go into the infinite? To infinity and beyond. And maybe that is all we really mean with infinite as human beings. That beyond our understanding. And of course then our mathematicians wants to put it in numbers. I don't know. I'm going to have to spend a whole moon on this question. Can the universe really be finite? Both seem absolutely absurd. Well, I suppose finite. No. Nothing makes sense. Sophia herself will guide your way.